The year was 1804. East of the muddy Camp Wood, two men were sent on a mission to survey the new neighborhood. Thomas Jefferson convinced Congress the future was looking out west. Manifest destiny was here. Those two men would spearhead a quest. They traveled with a party then, men that could stand the fatigue. There was Meriwether Lewis, who was ready to lead this league, followed by Mr. William Clark, slightly older at 33, who played forever second chair on every historical marquee. The Corps of Northwestern Discovery, as the group had announced themselves, went up the Missouri River and wound up on all our bookshelves. It was an odd time in our past, and the story comes with some torque. They started up with 45 men, along with Clark's slave named York.
No, actually, he was raped.
They rowed a 55-foot boat, which was built for the rugged terrain, as it helped advance their progress of this most notable campaign. They traveled armed to the butt crack, and that odd time best describes, to take on any oncomers or conquer indigenous tribes. They also left with offerings and enough whiskey to suffice. It was only 30 gallons, a bit meager to be precise. Our boy Clark was the friendly type. He was a ginger-haired extrovert who'd converse as the day is long, having his expertise couldn't hurt. Now, Lewis was from Virginia and behaved the opposite way. He was Moody Johnson, both veterans back in the day. They both served in the Indian Wars out on the Ohio frontier. It was a different era back then. Racial hostilities would appear. Lewis conspired with the president, acting as his secretary. They knew each other as neighbors, and this wouldn't be arbitrary. The U.S. stopped at the river, Mississippi, if that wasn't enough. The Louisiana Purchase was unexplored, pretty rough. It was owned outright by the French, all the way to the Great Divide. No one knew of Rocky Mountains, something this voyage would provide. Napoleon sold his interests for $11 million in cash. The intel was unclear at best between 'twas legit and balderdash. They went looking for a corridor to reach the opposite coastline. The rivers then each substantial stream, and then map it out on a design. Everything from elevation measured upon reconnaissance, from men that can handle themselves with very little convenience. They were looking for everything from climates and times of the year, animals and landmarks they pass, and write it all down nice and clear. Get acquainted with the natives, to whatever degree that they can. Use their own discretion, of course, and that was the gist of their plan. Boils and dysentery was a messed up hurdle to cross. It was blamed on the H2O and the thicker than tartar sauce. The mosquitoes and ticks were bad. They encountered while passing through. George Juilliard was their hunter, and pretty good at his craft, too. There was Reuben and Joseph Field and John Coulter, to drop some names. Lewis walked on shore a great deal, documenting their travel lanes. Clark was running cartography, and Joseph got bit by a snake. Lewis treated him with gunpowder before deadly venoms could take. They met the Otos 2 months in, 600 miles into their trip, the mouth of the Platte River, and gave some gifts for the courtship. Lewis addressed them as children, even though he was 29. And then he informed them that the land you're standing on is mine. He's not politically correct in our modern way of thinking, but he told them to suck it up and assimilate without blinking. I'm not going to candy coat things. This is the dark side of history, but we should know it anyway, which is the reason for my story. As they went on to deserted La Liberté, a French waterman, that soldier they brought to justice, going as lenient as they can. La Liberté had prior knowledge and would never be found again. He fled to go dine with the Oto, at least that's what they'd explain. Charles Floyd's ruptured appendix took the young man out of the running. He'd be the only fatality in that 28 months. Stunning. They buried him on the top of a bluff and left him the honors of war by a river that bears his name. You really can't do that much more. In 1800, 60 million buffalo used to roam the plains. 90 years later, a few were left, and wasting away most remains. They would kill only what they'd eat. It felt great at the end of the night. Morale was looking pretty high, and everything was working right. The Teton Sioux were warriors who patrolled the plains for the whites, who were not in the business of giving these native folks their rights. One morning in late September, a tense 3-day ordeal broke out near modern Pierre, South Dakota, outnumbered 10-to-1 turnout. While the expedition made their stand and bought passage with tobacco, they made it by the skin of their teeth, leaving nervous in the afterglow. Then there was the Araucara they came across in their bull boats. The brief encounter with this culture left some with more anecdotes. 5 stars for hospitality when squaws were offered for the night. York the Freed would horrify them, much to his very own delight. He spun tales of life before I was wild once upon a time, and used to consume the weaker before my starring in this rhyme. Mutinous expression was the crime Private Newman engaged in. The Araucara bore witness to all those lashes left on his skin. He was whipped 75 times, and the natives did not agree. It was rather barbaric. It was nothing they wanted to see. Winter hit hard in North Dakota, if you can believe that tall tale. 1,600 miles had elapsed from when Lewis and Clark set sail. 6 months into their expedition, and they had to wait out the snow. They'd build a camp for the winter and meet the Mandans before they go. So they set up camp near Bismarck and took the brunt of the blizzard. North Dakota in the winter, fellas, it doesn't take a wizard. The Missouri was frozen solid, and the natives needed their help. There was military as well, and the winter was making them yelp. Big White the Grand Chief would approach and tell that the buffalo was near. They needed all the hunters they could get, because survival was their only career. Lewis joined their hunting party and returned to camp with success. 11 men with freezer burn, but they did pitch in nonetheless. When they hunkered for the winter, they would celebrate New Year's Eve. They'd party with the Mandan tribe, and the men were all granted leave. February 11th came, and Lewis delivered a baby. Sacagawea at 16 was Toussaint Charbonneau's old lady. He would act as the translator, this French-Canadian fur trapper. You'd consider someone handy, a real asset for a mapper. They'd learn that they require horses to pass the Rocky Mountain Range, and if it would interest them, Sacagawea could arrange. She was a Shoshone native, whose people all lived at the foot. It took until the month of March for the ice to finally kaput. The keelboat returned to St. Louis, loaded up with Indian trade. 32 folks and a baby, on a course that's already laid. They continued west for the coast, 2 pirogues and 6 dugout boats, traversing through this beautiful land, and writing it all down in notes, until they came upon a grizzly. 6 approached this beast unperceived. All were really good hunters, too. There were bullets that bad boy received. Then the bear stood up to ram them as the men were running away. It took one last shot to kill, to everybody's dismay. They came to the Marias River, where they had a decision to make. They were caught off guard, it would seem. They had to choose which one to take. It took 5 days to flip a coin, deciding to take the southern fork. Lewis ventured ahead by land, and William Clark would chill with York. They first laid eyes on the Rockies, and understood without a doubt they'd need to pass before winter. Thank goodness they chose the right route. They came across Great Falls, Montana, and didn't understand the pitch. 412 feet and 10 miles, a 31-day backbreaking bitch. 17 miles to lug the boats until July 4th rolled around. With Great Falls behind the team, they finally found level ground. This time Clark got out of the boat in search of the Shoshone tribe. They'd encountered no other nations since Fort Mandan as they transcribed. They reached 3 forks of the Missouri, which is really not all that far. It took the men 23 days. It takes 2.5 hours by car. They were getting pretty desperate without those guides to show them through, fearing the worst for their success, with nothing else left to do. They followed the most western route, the river called the Jefferson, in hopes it would lead the right way. Its course Sacagawea's help had run. Sacagawea wasn't a map, but she'd point out a few landmarks. At Beaverhead Rock, Lewis got out, and their away team disembarks. They were looking for Shoshone, or anybody with a horse.
Checking out people of Walmart.
Clark was sick back on the boat, with York right by his side, of course. Lewis spotted a native man on horseback not wanting to talk. He ran away and led them to the divide to all of their shock. Lemhi passed more mountains to go, and no idea just how far. They've come across heaven and hell just to get where the heck they are. 2 days would elapse before they encountered the Shoshone tribe to guide them through the mountain range and abandon them how I describe. Sacagawea's own brother was a Shoshone tribal chief. Things were finally looking up. It came as a much-needed relief. There was a trail far up to the north, followed by the Nez people. And the course is mighty treacherous and can be a mighty big handful. Toby would be their tour guide as their land expedition starts. They crossed the Bitterroot Mountains, where no game roams around those parts. They had a hell of a struggle, 9 days for 180 miles. Snow would start to fall all day long, just to add more to their trials. With nothing but berries to eat, they would have to slaughter a colt. They would follow indigenous markers through that trail they weren't able to bolt. They'd meet the Nez Indians down off the western-facing edge, and met a chief called Twisted Hair down off that horrible ledge. Then they dug out some more canoes to take them the rest of the way. The friendship sparked with these people wasn't one destined to stay. Toby bowed out near the rapids when he left the group high and dry. And as they passed their namesake, Lewis and Clark were ready to die. They entered Clarkston, Washington, and bought dog meat from a local tribe. This sickened Clark, who went without. And then he wrote it down to describe. On October 16th, they had reached the Columbia River, but they could not be less enthused. They were just pissed and looking to shiver. That's when the men started to notice Western culture starting to inject. Items from trade scattered around, and some attitudes they'd reject. They'd have to portage through the dells to continue their adventure. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? The answer to that's immature. The river became wider now, as the fog starts to settle in. The rains would come to welcome them. The Pacific Northwest strikes again. It took a week to cross Grace Bay, where it widens by 15 miles. It was enough to make them seasick, prolonging those awful trials. November 15th, they blazed on through, making their famous appointments. With so much excitement in the end, they set up Camp Disappointment. Thank you.